If you are over 65 or know someone who is, listen up, because there's a superfood that has been shown to help keep you walking for 15 years longer. But why? And what is this food that can do all of that? Well, today we're going to discuss exactly that. Hi, I'm a physical therapist and health educator, and today I want to talk about a superfood that has been shown to help older adults walk for 15 years longer. This is based off a study that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it's one of my favorite studies to reference when talking about diet and nutrition. So the question is, what did they eat? What was this magical food that had all these great benefits? It was bone broth. That's right, bone broth. Now, before you click off this video thinking, "Oh, this is silly," stick around, because there's actually some really good evidence that bone broth may be a superfood. I will say right now, though, that no single food or supplement is going to be the magic bullet to better health. But it turns out that bone broth does have some pretty interesting properties. So let's first talk about what bone broth is. Bone broth is made by simmering the bones of chicken, beef, fish, or other animals for a long period of time. This process extracts certain nutrients that are found in the bones, including things like glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate. These two components are extremely important for cartilage health and joint health in general. When you think about our joints, they are made of many different types of tissues, including things like bone, which is on the outside of the joint. Then you have ligaments on the inside of the joint, connecting bone to bone. And then you have things like cartilage, which is the smooth, rubbery tissue that covers the ends of the bones. When these bones meet, kind of like a ball in a socket, this allows the bones to glide back and forth without rubbing against each other. Now, as people age, they tend to lose more and more of this cartilage, leading to what we call osteoarthritis. And research has shown that both glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate may help preserve what little cartilage we have left, or even help rebuild some of that cartilage, allowing our joints to move more freely. But that's not all. Bone broth also contains things like collagen, which is a protein that helps support our skin, hair, nails, and even our joints. Collagen is actually the most abundant protein in our bodies, and it's a key component of our connective tissues. In fact, when we digest bone broth, the collagen breaks down into something called glycine, which has been shown to reduce inflammation in our body. Inflammation is one of the root causes of many chronic diseases, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. So anything that we can do to reduce inflammation may be beneficial for our overall health. Another thing that bone broth contains is something called hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is another component of our connective tissue, and it actually helps lubricate our joints. It's estimated that about 14% of our body weight is hyaluronic acid, and it's important for maintaining healthy joints and preventing osteoarthritis. Now, if all of this sounds really great, it's because it is. And there's actually a lot of evidence that supports the consumption of bone broth for improving joint health. A meta-analysis that was published in 2018 looked at several studies that investigated the effects of collagen peptides on osteoarthritis. The results showed that taking collagen peptides either through a supplement or through bone broth improved symptoms of osteoarthritis, including pain and stiffness. However, it's important to note that most of these studies used a high dose of collagen peptides, typically between 10 and 20 grams per day. This is much more than what you would get from just drinking bone broth. Still, it's possible that the nutrients found in bone broth could have a similar effect. There's also some evidence that consuming bone broth may improve gut health. Our gut is lined with a single layer of cells that act as a barrier between the inside of our gut and the rest of our body. When this barrier is compromised, we get what's called leaky gut syndrome, and that can lead to inflammation throughout the entire body. Consuming bone broth may help heal the gut and prevent leaky gut syndrome, again, leading to less inflammation. So all of this is great, but how did they know that these participants were consuming bone broth and not something else? Well, they actually collected 24-hour urine samples from all of these participants to verify that they were consuming bone broth. They did this because bone broth contains specific amino acids that can be identified in the urine. So it was clear that those who were consuming bone broth had higher levels of these amino acids in their urine compared to those who weren't consuming bone broth. They took about 50 milliliters of urine from each participant and sent it off to the lab. The labs measured the concentration of hydroxyproline and proline in each sample. These are two amino acids that are found in high concentrations in bone broth. By measuring the concentration of these amino acids in the urine, the researchers were able to verify that the participants were consuming bone broth. In fact, they used this method in the 1990s to estimate how much bone broth people were consuming. However, over time, they realized that people's diets were changing, and they weren't consuming as much bone broth as they used to. So they decided to look into whether or not bone broth could have any health benefits. What they found was that people who consumed more bone broth had lower levels of inflammation in their bodies, which could potentially lead to a lower risk of chronic diseases. Additionally, people who consumed more bone broth were more likely to report having good health, which suggests that bone broth may have an overall positive impact on health and well-being. But perhaps the most intriguing finding of this study was that people who consumed more bone broth were less likely to have mobility issues such as difficulty walking. In fact, the study found that people who consumed the most bone broth were 65% less likely to have mobility issues than those who consumed the least amount. This could be due to several factors, including the anti-inflammatory properties of bone broth, its ability to improve joint health, and its potential to improve gut health. As I mentioned earlier, inflammation is a root cause of many chronic diseases, including things like osteoarthritis, which can lead to difficulty moving and being active. By reducing inflammation, bone broth could potentially help people maintain their mobility as they age. In addition to that, bone broth could potentially help preserve cartilage and improve joint health, allowing people to move more freely and easily. Finally, by improving gut health, bone broth could potentially help prevent leaky gut syndrome, which has been linked to inflammation and autoimmune disorders. Overall, this study suggests that consuming bone broth may be a simple and effective way to improve mobility and reduce the risk of mobility issues in older adults. However, it's important to note that this is a correlational study, which means that we can't determine cause and effect. It's possible that there may be other factors that contribute to mobility issues in older adults, such as low physical activity or a poor diet. In addition, the study relied on self-reported data on bone broth consumption, which may not be accurate. Despite these limitations, the findings of this study are intriguing and warrant further investigation. Future studies should look into the potential benefits of bone broth for improving mobility and reducing the risk of mobility issues in older adults. Ultimately, if you enjoy drinking bone broth and find that it helps you move better and feel better, then there's no harm in continuing to consume it. Just keep in mind that it's not a magic bullet and won't replace the importance of a well-balanced diet, regular exercise, and other healthy lifestyle habits. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something new. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a like if you found this video helpful. Also, feel free to drop your questions down below. I love answering your questions. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for next week's video. Bye!